Hello everybody, it's John Waters here again on John Waters Unchained. My guest today is Melissa Ciummei. She's somebody I've been observing for quite a few years now, since the beginning of this, what would you call it, shambles that we're in a way that was quite unusual in the beginning to see, because she talked always about things to do with money, finance, economics, these questions. At first I wasn't certain how this fitted in. Now I realise this is the central thing, that this was never about our health, it was about our wealth, or whatever, whether great or small of it. Today I want to talk to her about this moment we're in, which is probably the most critical moment that's approaching now, which is the attempt to introduce the Central Bank Digital Currencies, which many people now believe is very imminent, which will have all kinds of implications for the future of the human race, for freedom, for income, for rights, for everything, really. When we spoke very briefly the other day, you mentioned something which has been in my head a lot in the last few years, which is that I think it was August the 15th, 2019, there was a letter issued by BlackRock to, I think, the Federal Exchange in the first instance, wasn't it? And perhaps also to the various governments, the G20 and so on, which essentially said that the world economy was about to collapse and needed essentially to be taken down and put in a coma essentially. And that essentially was and is the meaning of the COVID episode. It is about money fundamentally. It was never about a virus, it was never about a disease, it was about money. Is that your sense of things?
That was always my thesis on it. It was a financial lockdown, because lockdowns don't stop the spread of a virus. So it goes even further back to the 2008 collapse. And if you remember, just shortly after in about 2010, there was H1N1 swine flu. Same vaccine rollout. Countries ban in the vaccine for 100% of their population. So the economy broke then, but they managed to kick the can down the road because they implemented QE, money printing, to kind of balance the books. But then in 2019, there was a global contraction of the economy anyway. So we need expansion because we're in a debt-based system. So you need to be constantly expanding the money supply. But there was a contraction. So that caused overheating in the markets. And at the Jackson Hole Economic Symposium in the August of 2019, BlackRock anticipated the crisis, as you say, whatever they knew, and they put forward a plan which was merging fiscal and monetary policy, central banks going direct and pushing up inflation, which was implemented. Then 1 month later, the crisis occurred. You have the September 2019, the repo crisis, where rates went from about 2% up to 10%. So that's twice that of the Lehman crisis. Everybody knows about the Lehman crisis. Nobody knows about the September repo crisis, really. And then 1 month later, event 201, the lockdown, that gave them the ability to print unprecedented levels of money and do it under the guise of it's to save the people, but it was never about the people. They couldn't print enough money to get them out of it, so they had to lock down the economy.
So it's as if this thing was there as a ready-made plan to be put in play whenever it was needed.
Well, they changed the definition of what a pandemic was just before H1N1. So before that, a pandemic it was categorised in severity and high mortality. But they pulled that out because they couldn't push a pandemic if there was no severity and mortality. So instead of that, they replaced it with transmission. And if you think about this pandemic, would there be a pandemic without the PCR test?
No.
No. So they had everything in place. They knew this was going to happen. I would say that they knew this was going to happen from 1971, because in 1971 we're completely removed from any gold standard. So then that means all currencies became fiat, meaning they're backed by nothing but faith in a bank and ledger system. So if you know all fiat currencies fail, you know this one's going to fail. So you need to start planning what the next one would be. And that would be, if you look at the Club of Rome, the limits to growth in the first global revolution, they said they needed a new enemy to unite us. And what they said was pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, and famine would fit the bill. Well, pandemics also fit the bill, but I would mark on your calendar the water shortages and the famine, because they also have that in play. They're trying to bring about a currency reset. At that Jackson Hole Economic Symposium, Mark Carney's speech, the current Prime Minister of Canada, former Goldman Sachs, Bank of England, Bank of Canada, his speech was on a currency reset in 2019.
Is the foundational problem, as you say, currency? Isn't it really? Isn't that it? And what is, to tell the layperson what this means, that we've had these fiat currencies for so long? What are the implications vis-a-vis the meaning of money, vis-a-vis the reliability of anything we think we own, the levels of debt that our countries have, all of them? How bad is that situation from the point of view of where we were with the gold standard and that kind of anchor that's supplied, that we're literally floating into the stratosphere in terms of the value of money, in terms of the real value of anything that we think we now own?
Well, we've floated into the stratosphere and the balloon has burst and it's coming crashing back down. So that's where we are now. So what is the problem? The problem is, well, globally, there's too much debt and there's not enough growth to cover the debt. That puts us on an unsustainable debt path. But then you also have issues with demographics, because we have an aging population. So how does that affect production, consumption, pensions? Then we have an issue with globalization as we know it is failing, and there's a restructuring of, say, BRICS versus the West. And then we have emerging market economies that 1970 they accounted for about a third of global GDP. Currently it's about half. By 2030 that's projected to be 3/4. So that puts demands on energy. With their growth, they're putting demands on energy. So all of these things are combining at once. But what you were saying about kind of the ownership, the way it's working right now, so you have an asset, and the economy is being financialized. So you have an asset, but that asset has been borrowed against, bet against, insured against, and so on. So money was made from money rather than from production and manufacturing.
Yes.
That house of cards has fallen. So in that scenario then, you have to go after ownership of the asset. And that's what they're doing. That's why they're doing tokenization of all assets, assets registered, BlackRock and the likes ban up everything. If you look at COP26, it said 450 firms control 40% of global assets. They're coming for the rest because they know everything else is falling apart.
So fundamentally, as a layman see it, that the unmooring of money, so-called, from the gold standard, which was a kind of an anchor, which tied it into a form of equilibrium with the productive process. In other words, gold is hard to get, it's scarce, it's difficult to mine, so on. Therefore, in some sense, it reflects what happens when somebody goes to bed in the morning and goes to work. They have to put some effort in. So there's a sense of a balance. And that was just literally ripped away. And there was this rupture between money and human productivity, human endeavour. There was no connection. And yet people continued to see money in the same old way, as if this had never happened at all. Isn't that what happened, really?
Well, if you think about what money is, and it's a similar thing that they're trying to replicate with carbon credits. So one person or group get to create and enforce contracts, and they get other people to work in order to get these contracts, but they don't do any work at all. And nobody ever questions it. I did economics for A-level, and money was never mentioned when you go to school. They never teach you anything about money, so people never question it. And it actually works quite well when people don't question it. But when people start to question it and realise what's really going on, the whole thing can fall apart really quickly. And that's what they're struggling with now, that people are starting to realise that these notes buy less and less. I need to move away from that and into that. And it's a race to the end right now. They could have got all of this in, but something happened. It broke. And now there's a race to the end. There's an analogy. I used to watch, when you used to be able to watch TV, The Walking Dead. And one of the room was full of zombies, and they were walking through the zombies, and they were being quiet, and they were going to get to the end. But the crash happened, and then they all woke up. That's the current scenario that we're in right now, that everybody's waking up, and they're trying to make a bolt to the end. And they're going to have to enforce these digital IDs, because it's not, CBDC is just the control mechanism, but it doesn't work. It's useless without digital ID. So you need the data and combine the data with the control mechanism for the totalitarian control.
The control mechanism is not the money. It's the actual, the means by which we acquire the money and spend it. So that's where the surveillance will happen. That's where the prohibitions will happen, the stopping of transactions or whatever. It's not the money itself that's actually the control instrument in that sense. It's the actual infrastructure of the communication of money. Is there? I mean, I picked up from you there that there was something, I think, that you implied that they have made errors, or they have made a mistake or two along the way, that this is not happening to their liking. Is that right, or am I wrong?
Well, credit is breaking. So they financially had to lock everything down because of would have exploded. Like, if you even look at the derivatives market, nobody fully understands the economy right now. It's expanded to a degree that you can't. So if it breaks, what 2019 proved is there's now no fixing it. There's no way to fix it anymore. The only reason is because people are under so much psychological manipulation with distraction. But if you took that away and people started to realise, everything's going to fall apart really, really quickly. But so they need to get CBDCs.
Don't many people, and maybe even a majority, or maybe the vast majority, seem to think that things have never been better? There's so much money floating around. But it's fake money, isn't it? It's not real money. It's ultimately, when it crashes, it'll all go to nothing.
Well, the debt-based system isn't entirely bad because we have built and prospered so much on it. But then you have to ask yourself, what is debt? So debt is pulling purchasing power from the future into the present. So what does that mean? It means it's putting a claim on your future labour. But that doesn't work when it's in the trillions. It's not our future labour. No, so whose future labour is it?
It's our great-great-grandchildren.
Exactly. So we're selling them off for our prosperity right now. We're willing to sell them into slavery.
How does that work, though? Because it's a theoretical idea which seems to kind of satisfy bankers and economists and so on as a theory. But in practice it's impossible, because we don't even know if these children will be born to work. I mean, there are other factors that play in well, as the diminishing demographic, the hemorrhaging of population from, say, Western countries. It's very well possible that, say, Ireland will have basically a gerontocracy in another 10 or 15 years and will be incapable of paying back anything. And all of this paper, this money, these zeros that we owe, will be like meaningless. And what then? What happens then?
Well, what is happening in Ireland right now? We're being sold off. So they're selling off the assets. In order to keep the game going, they're selling off the land, the resources,
land and buildings,
people.
Isn't it really, essentially?
They're selling everything off.
And who's buying
these
it?
People, well, like I say, there's 450 firms that control 40%. Who knows the rest? There's a class of people that, when's it going to be enough? When it's a little bit more, it's just never going to be enough. And then it takes away the value. I mean, we've been here before in Ireland with feudalism, and we're blindly walking right back into it, because that's where we're moving. They've told us that that's where they're moving if you go look up at circular economy. So if they plan to take ownership of everything, so how do they do that? Well, it's very easy. They don't have to come and confiscate your land and put you off of it. They just tax it out of your ownership. Historically, that's what they do. So then they own it, and then they rent it back to you in order to be sustainable. But it's not enough for your land. If you look at it, they want absolutely your washing machine, absolutely everything. They want to be rented. So why would they want that? Well, if you know that the debt-based system is falling apart, so that means that you need to increase debt for the demand, more consumption, more profits. So if that model is dying, then you have to go, well, where do we go after this? So if you move into a subscription rental economy, then you have a customer for life and an unending revenue stream. There's also demographic issues that when you get older, you kind of consume less. So everything is moving away from consumption, and they're moving into this feudal system where they own everything and you get to rent it.
And the extraordinary thing here is that this is a complete regression, not just like in terms of decades, but in terms of centuries back in time. And the response of the cultures of the West, let's say, which one would have expected on the basis of having lived in one of them or observed many of them for decades, as I have, as you have, not so many maybe, but you know, we had a sense of the kind of responses that would happen to certain things. You know, the feudalism being one of them, like would be like, you must be joking. Are you having a laugh? All the intellectuals, all the artists, all the philosophers, all the poets, all the civil libertarians, they're all good with this, as far as we know, because they can't be unaware that some of these things are going on, or something radical is going on, and yet they've had nothing to say about it.
There's techno-feudalism as well. So if you look at Amazon didn't make a profit for maybe over 15 years. Now, you can't have a business and not operate a profit, so why would they be able to do that? Because it was about pushing everybody else out, undercutting them, and then they have the entire market. Uber are the exact same. I think Uber started in 2009 and didn't turn a profit until, I think, the second quarter of 2023 maybe. So again, it's about cornering markets, pricing everybody else out of the market, and then you own the entire market. So this has been happening under our noses for a very long time. And we're kind of conditioned away from ownership anyway. If people say, I own my house, I own my car, do you? Are you in quasi-ownership? Is there debt attached to it? Because if there's debt attached to it, you don't own it. With your phone, you rent your phone. With Spotify, so you're renting everything. And like we grew up in the generation, I grew up with records and tapes. So before even CDs, and now everything's just on your phone. So everything's been centralized into your phone so that your phone can become your prison warden moving forward. Because I try and keep my phone in a Faraday pouch, really difficult to do. And I, of the generation that grew up without a phone, but still at that, I find myself, I have to force myself to detach from my phone. But that's incredibly difficult to do. I don't think anybody, if anybody left their house now without their phone, panic.
Because during the so-called pandemic period, this was being stated fairly openly by lots of people, including you and others, that what was going on at one level was that, you know, the family business, the local shop, the local trader, they were being squeezed out to make room for corporations, to make Ireland and other places safe for corporations. That's clearly happening now. If you go around the country and look at villages and towns, like we were in the one down southeast the last few days, and there used to be 2 or 3 cafes. There are none in it now. They're all closed. Now there isn't a Starbucks either, but so there's nothing.
No, but they
for the
let them
moment.
open back up. So they closed them down and they give them money, but some of them didn't get enough money, so they closed. So that shook the tree a bit. And then they let them open back up, but then we're open, we're closed, we're open, we're closed. You have to spend a fortune on all these plastic screens and stickers, and we're going to make it as uncomfortable as possible for you to even operate. So they kept on closing them down.
Yes.
But the lockdown was even, the psychological implications of it were even more dangerous, because people were accepting surveillance under the guise of public health.
Yes.
So track and trace, you were accepting of track and trace. The COVID passes, that was your introduction to controlling your access to society for digital ID, because that's exactly what digital ID is. That's what it's literally stated. This goes back, there's an 2018 Identity in the Digital World, a WEF paper. And if you go look, there's a circle and it shows you everything that digital ID will be introduced for. So for financial services, government services, healthcare, travel, etc. But in that it says this digital ID determines what products, services and information you can access, or conversely, what is closed off to you. That's what the COVID pass did. I couldn't go to a restaurant, the movies, I couldn't go to any of those places. In fact, there's an outdoor Christmas market in Belfast that you couldn't get into without a COVID pass. But even that was a lie. The way it worked in the UK is that the law stated that you had to have a COVID status, and the business had to confirm that you had a COVID status.
Yes.
Nobody ever said it was a COVID pass. That was, so it's like a circle and there's a gap in it.
There's a sleight of hand, really.
Yes, so people put that together, but there's multiple ways.
But at the same time, I mean, if you pushed any of those things and you ended up in court, the court would fiddle the whole thing in order to make it look like you had been guilty of something.
Yes. Yeah, well, there's a lot of people though that took, there's Michael Brentnell, one of the solicitors in the north, every case that he's took with it, he's won the case. So they were acting completely.
You have to know the code.
Yes, and the thing is we don't all have a law degree to find out. We're gaining one really fast because we know that we have to, because we know that with the laws coming in, I mean, with them pushing for this digital ID, under the law they have to provide an alternative. But people aren't looking for the alternative because it's going to be inconvenient, and people hate that.
Are we headed for, which is it, is this going to be a kind of a supernova of currencies, or is it going to be a controlled landing by the elites who are managing it? I mean, are they waiting for some key moment? Are they in charge anymore? It's not clear. As you say, things have not gone all entirely their own way. How do you think that's going to go?
That would completely depend on the people. So it's based on our compliance and consent, exactly the same as the lockdowns, the vaccine mandates. They were all based, whether people like to accept it or not, it was based on compliance and consent. It's going to be the exact same with digital ID. Like I say, it's the most, that's the last gate you get to rebel at. After that, it's a small step to CBDCs, and then CBDCs being linked to carbon credits. So it's digital ID. It's are people willing to accept a digital ID? Now, Stefan Ulrich at the World Health Summit in, I think, 2021, said 2 years ago, 95% of people, he's the head of Bayer Pharmaceutical Division, 95% of people would have said no to gene therapy. Now, the BIS did a report in 2019, I think it was a McKinsey & Company report, saying that uptake of CBDC would be around 4 to 12%. So if they can manage to get 95% of people saying no to gene therapy, but say 70% of people took part in the vaccine mandates, I mean, it's easier to submit the digital ID than it is to get something unknown injected into your arm. So that would dictate that people will comply.
Yeah, and people have already ceded so much of their privacy. People don't seem to be indifferent to the fact that their phones are actually microphones, and so on, including myself. We're careless about these things, and we've let so many things slip for the convenience of these instruments. It certainly looks like they're going to have a relatively easy time with maybe 2/3 to 3/4 of the population, and that their difficulties will be with the last quarter.
But we're the ones that create revolutions. Historically, you don't need the entire population to create a revolution. You need about 3 to 5% of the population, but it has to be active and sustained. And the people that are fighting are getting tired, and there just doesn't seem to be, I'm not seeing really new people. It's the same faces for 5 years. We're not really seeing new people stepping forward, but maybe the time will come when people will step forward, because historically, with this level of control and oppression, the people do fight back and they do win, but a digital prison is really difficult to get out of.
Yeah. On that point about what we'll call the resistance, let's call it, with a small r maybe, it's quite unusual in what we're seeing in that context in this episode. It doesn't really resemble the resistances of old in, say, Eastern Europe, which would be, poets and intellectuals and so on, or even in Ireland in the 1916 Rising. It's like kind of a mix and gathering of people, and they don't necessarily seem to be driven by, it's kind of a gut feeling more than it is an idea. And I just wonder, how do you see how this is going to roll out? Because ultimately, what's different this time, or one of the things that's different, is the level of behavioral psychological methodologies that are available to the architects of this. And the fact that they can divide populations on the basis of education, for example, and appeal to their intelligence of one section, who understand about the science. And then, on the other hand, these, as it were, ignoramuses don't understand about the science, and that's why they're behaving in this way. This was never a factor in the revolutions of Eastern Europe, where you had somebody like, say, Václav Havel or Czesław Miłosz, these writers and intellectuals who were leading their people and in a sense, writing the manifesto of the revolution for them and speaking of it. These conditions are not present, are they?
No, probably due to the psychological manipulation. So the internet's kind of a double-edged sword. So revolutions are considerably more difficult with a divided population. And with a divided population, that is a path of minimal resistance for digital ID and CBDCs. And I'm certainly seeing it happen in the South. People that are aware of what's going on are tearing each other apart. So if we're tearing each other apart, what hope do we have? With psychological manipulation, you have got to understand that you are a victim, I am a victim, and just if you have that awareness, then you're not going to be as arrogant about it. So I'm constantly asking myself, why do I think that? Am I sure that that's what I think? Because if you look at let's just take Alexa. That's a good example. So you start with Alexa going, put me on Elvis, okay? So you're starting there, like 1950s, 60s. And then she'll go, well, if you like that song, you'll like that song. And if you like that song, you'll like that song. And until your compass is maybe listening to Red Hot Chili Peppers or, some pop band. And you're like, but I started there. But algorithms are doing that to us all the time. And they're siloing us into echo chambers. So it's very important then to get off of the internet. We are social beings. For our mental health, there's nothing better than social interaction. And that has gone because they closed down. What did they do? Closed down all the bars, anywhere where people would socially interact. You weren't even allowed to go to somebody's house to discuss it. That was done deliberately.
I'm beginning to see this now, and I didn't really believe it was going to happen. Because we had this idea, kind of romantic idea, that whereas, okay, tech and all that stuff is bearing down upon us, there's the kind of, we can answer back using tech also. I think that's the kind of forlorn hope, because I'm seeing now that, say, Substack, which is I've been on it for the last 5 years, which used to be the free speech platform. They just never questioned what you wrote and so on. Now, in the UK, they're implementing the Public Safety Act. Mm-hmm. And they're not alone, like, implementing the aspects of that which relate to, say, as it's intended, pornography, to protect children, or threats of violence, or maybe mentions treatment of issues like suicide or self-harm, those kinds of things. It's basically being used in a blanket way, not by the British government, by Substack against its own writers. So clearly what we see this is they've caved completely, instantly. And they were the most, as it were, progressive platform on the internet, in my view, for the last few years. In terms of reach, I don't mean just individual bloggers, but in terms of reach and the capacity to actually get material out to other people. This is extraordinarily disappointing, because the implications of it seem to me that the internet is not going to be as much use to us as we thought it was going to be, and it may actually not be of any use to us at all.
It can be a source of information, because with this, so what they're trying to do in the UK is that everybody's in the kiddie settings, unless you prove who you are, and that's in order to bring digital ID. But the problem that they have is that the information is out there and they need to take control of it. So they have all of these ministries of truth. They're like a censorship industrial complex popped up, where if I was to share a link to a government website or a Pfizer website, I got a ban on social media. You know, it wasn't saying anything controversial, it was just maybe read this. So they need to get control of the information. But for me, the biggest part of the information is that the information currently is out there and people don't react to it. But the more ridiculous and nonsensical things get, the more uncomfortable people are in ignoring what's going on, and they start to question it. And that's why human interaction is one of the best things. But the problem is people go in and go, you know that they're doing this, you know that they're doing that, right? And the ears close. If you really want to have impact, ask questions. Because when you ask somebody a question, well, why do you think they're doing that? I mean, why would they be bringing in digital ID and CBDC? I don't recall the last public rally on the streets, please bring us in, we need a new currency. So it's not that we need it, it's not beneficial to us, so they need it, right? Why do you think they're bringing that in? Because if I ask you a question, your critical thinking ability is activated, because you have to think of an answer. So I think that's the best. And like I say, people are already aware. So I think that's where we have to go back to old school. We have to move away. And I think even with the internet, I think they've overstepped the boundaries of the internet with their AI. It's not even enjoyable anymore. So if you're watching videos, you're maybe 15 seconds into a video and you're going, do you know what? I don't think a gorilla can surf. I think this is fake. And it's everybody's seeing it, and then there's then a craving towards something that's more authentic. It's a facet of who you are, yes. But it's really dangerous for young people because it's teaching them that they're inferior. And for me, I think that's so that they can consider AI as superior. So your avatar is prettier, your chat GPT is smarter, but you're inferior, and we're not. We're incredible.
Hasn't there been that syndrome over the last few years, quite a few years, whereby new developments, new progressive developments technologically are so venerated that they're rushed into the education system, like the way screens were, as opposed. Nobody sought to investigate the question of whether there's a difference between learning or reading off a screen than reading from a book or a magazine or a newspaper, and there is apparently. Nicholas Carr's book going back 15 years talks about that, The Shadows. The same thing now, they're rushing to make AI available to young people, to students, who are going to become hooked on it and dependent on it. And I think you're absolutely right. It's now transparently banal because they're behind. It's like last year's, it's like eating yesterday's dinner or something. It's cold.
But it's not. It doesn't work anymore because data is the new gold. Data feeds the AI. But it's only as good as the data it receives. So what's happening is, especially since Grok and ChatGPT, so what's happening is people are getting their information from ChatGPT. They're regurgitating that out without checking it, and she is a prolific liar, back out onto the internet. So then that's feeding the AI. So what would have been 100% accurate goes out as 99%, and then it's fed back in 98%. So it's becoming more and more and more inaccurate.
Yes.
And she's programmed because they know to lure you in. It's you are right about everything. A friend of mine was having a legal issue, and she asked ChatGPT, and ChatGPT says, yes, I'm right. And I says, here's what I want you to do. Go home, get your husband's phone. Put in the opposite, so come from the other person's point of view, and put it in. And she texts me and goes, ChatGPT says, they're right. And I goes, there you go.
Yes, it's extraordinary. I mean, I've been on Wikipedia against my will for years and years, and it's obviously written by my greatest enemies. They all get together every night, I think, and rewrite anything that needs to be corrected. In other words, anything that's true, they will change it to a lie. But recently, Grok started doing a kind of an encyclopedia entry about me. And somebody sent it to me, and I was fascinated by it because like 90% of it is not just accurate, but it's actually very flattering to me. I mean, it's kind of like what I think about myself, which may or not be accurate either, but that's another story. But the 10% is so wrong, it's like impossible to understand where they even got it from. Like it describes in detail how I graduated from UCD in 1978. I've never been to UCD. Well, I've been to the canteen there, yeah. But like, I have no idea where they got that. But this is a thing that I've noticed about it now, is that it's becoming blander and blander. I thought it was a while there where it was accelerating, and it was quite shockingly, fast in the way it seemed to be developing. Then it plateaued, and now it's kind of like really, and so that tells me that there would have been a short period maybe of adjustment where people begin to understand that and react against it. But I don't know if that's going to happen because it's been implemented by the authorities in such a way that people are not being given a choice. Like, we were never given a choice about any of this. I mean, if you think about going back 30 years, the whole discussion that started back in the 80s, which I remember, was part of it to some extent, about discussing like the future of work, the future of human dignity, the meaning of life if you have a society in which there are no jobs, no work. That discussion was completely taken off the table when we became rich, prosperous, and it just went underground. And 25 years later, Silicon Valley come right out of the building and say, okay, we have a pope, and it's us, funnily enough. You would actually think, in a certain sense, that democracy ended on some indefinable date in March 2020. But actually it had ended many years before that, hadn't it?
It is an illusion of choice. And even when you're saying that, so somebody could take what you said, UCD, so somebody could take that in fact, right? And they're putting that onto other people. And then it gets back and they hear, no, he said that he didn't go there. So even that could be part of the psychological manipulation, because if you're looking at a video and you're like, that's not real, or you're looking at information and you can't trust, now you don't trust or believe anything. That leaves you quite vulnerable. So, and they've certainly done that we can't say what a man or a woman is. That's, so if you are going to play along with that lie, that's like the Ben Franklin effect, where they get you to tell a small lie and then they escalate it, and then you don't trust or believe in anything. That leaves you very, very vulnerable to being manipulated.
And that's a moment of absolute rupture in the continuity of human consciousness in the world, isn't it? It's not like as if it's just another twist of fate in the world's culture. It's just because, you know, we're here and suddenly we're looking at things and we cannot be 100% sure whether it's true or false. Is that person Elon Musk, or is it an avatar saying things with Elon Musk's accent, which they can do quite easily?
Yeah.
So that tells us that the future, it's an unraveling of everything.
The danger, though, for them is that people then just completely, like I said, they just want to move back towards something that they can believe in. So they move back towards the authentic because it's just such a quagmire that I can't even get involved in it anymore. And then when you don't believe anything, it leaves you vulnerable for, it could be good or it could be bad, something, some person, whatever, to come along to give you hope to believe in them. So that's what people need to be careful about, that somebody's going to come along. For me, like, even if you look at social media in general, it's this idea, you know, followers and icons, and, you know, so that we're all little gods, that we all, you know, that we're all self-important. I think that you shouldn't, I despise the word followers. For me, it's people that would be similar in thinking to me. And there's plenty of people that completely oppose my thinking, and that's okay. We're not all supposed to think the same. But there's this idea that you're supposed to, that you're siloed into it. Like, I would deliberately go on pages in social media that I completely oppose. Now, reading them, you're like, ugh. But you have to, because otherwise you start to think that you're right about everything. But there's no debate anymore. I mean, I would certainly, if RTE, BBC, if they want to get back up on their feet, what I would recommend is putting people on that are completely opposed in their views and allowing them to debate. Because when you watch a debate, I went to, at school there was debate, so that allows you to think, I agree with them saying that, not that, and it allows you then to form your own way of thinking because they have done the research and they're sending it to you.
Well, it's very interesting, Melissa, that point, because that struck me years ago, maybe 15 years ago. I became conscious of a shift, because I used to do a lot of mainstream radio and TV, and you would get researchers would ring you up and ask your opinion on this, and then they would say, okay, can you do this, and they'll give you a brief or whatever. And as time went on, I realised that maybe at some indefinable point way back, maybe 20 years ago, the imperative of those exercises was always to get interesting people on to have a bit of an argument. And about 15 years ago, that ceased to be so. And it was clear what they were doing was setting up debates so that the guy who was wrong about everything was always beaten.
Yes.
And that was almost like a rehearsal for the era of cancel culture that we now live in, whereby it is mandatory that everybody be of the same viewpoint about everything. And the sole purpose, therefore, of debate is to prove the bad guy wrong about everything.
Yes, but that's not what a debate is supposed to be. Like, I would debate with my daughter. She thinks very different than me on so many things. And I love it, because when I walk away from a debate with her, I'm either going to be more certain about what I think, or I'm going to go, I never thought about that.
Yeah.
I'm going to go away and have a think about that. She's 24.
Well, you see, this is exactly it. Like, this is what I always say about debate. It's, we don't have these conversations in order to win them.
No.
We have them in order to, for ourselves, learn, and help that anybody who's listening can decide between us on this or that, or on different aspects. And that idea has completely gone from our culture. It's like, people are terrified of even thinking the wrong thing, never mind saying it.
Well, that's the number one fear, isn't it? In psychology, the number one fear isn't death, it's exclusion. Because exclusion would ultimately lead to death anyway, and it would be miserable. So people are so consumed about what other people think about them. And for me, what I say is I really don't care what other people think about me. I care what I think about me. So if people start thinking about themselves instead of, are you proud of yourself? Are you standing in your truth? Are you open to your truth being changed? Because I am. I'm willing to hear another story and go, okay, I didn't think of it like that. That's interesting. I'm not set in stone. I can change on certain things, but there's certain things that I will not move on.
Yeah, because we all steal little ideas from each other when we talk.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's the whole point of it. You say, oh, that bit fits my theory.
Yeah, I'm going to use that.
It adds something in. And that doesn't seem to be allowed either. We're at this extraordinary moment. I mean, there is this kind of view implicit in our culture and in the media, you hear it all the time, and even in experts, that it's almost as if the human race, qua human race, can deal with anything that's thrown at it. And that it can go through the whole of history from the cave to post-humanism, almost like you're going to a university or something, But I don't believe that that's true. I believe there will be a tipping point whereby the things that are being thrown at the human race, I think we're almost there. I mean, look at the level of anxiety there is now in modern society. Look at the quantum of antidepressant medication that's in use. Look at the levels of obesity, for example. The human race is becoming incapable of living already. And we're about to enter into the most extraordinary period in the entire history, perhaps, of human race, when we are confronted by being turned into cyborgs, by being given chips in our brains which will make us like multilingual overnight or whatever it is. There is also a kind of a view that you can't really logically and ethically argue against any mode of progress. So anything new cannot simply be suppressed. You have to allow it to go through. What is the answer to this? Because it seems to me that, and this isn't a new idea at all, but it's that our technological and our scientific capacities are now far outstripping our ethical development, and that we're going to hit a real wall one of these days.
So what really happened? So about 2 years ago, or 200 years ago, we were using biofuel, so it was with energy created this economy that we're currently living in right now. And then the debt-based system poured petrol onto the fire. But as you said, so we have everything that we could have possibly wanted. I'm fifth generation in my house. My dad grew up in that house without running water or electricity. So that's how close we are to that. But are we happier? Well, if we're all on antidepressants, we're clearly not happy. So then we need to look at this psychological manipulation of us consume. If you have this handbag, if you have this car, if you own this house, then you'll be happy. If you look like this, then you'll be happy. And it's not leading to happiness. So can we not then, as a species, say we need to renegotiate what we are? And we're so focused on technical progress, but we're not focused on human progress. The only thing is people aren't the bottom line. Profit is the bottom line.
That kind of resonates with something you said earlier about the necessity that the problem with our debt is that we're not creating enough growth. Mm-hmm. Now, there are different viewpoints on this, of course, because growth in some contexts is seen as problematic because it damages the environment, etc. There's also the idea that simply creating growth doesn't make people happier. Making them wealthier doesn't particularly make them happier. There's just a pretty strong evidence, the Easterlin paradox, for example, on that, which finds that there's a level beyond which is really hard to make people a little bit happier with even an awful lot of money, that once you've reached a certain level of self-sufficiency and existence, that you're about pretty much as happy as you're ever going to be, if you can maintain that. But while all of this, how is that riddle to be kind of, when you have all of these monolithic institutions pushing for more growth, more profit, more zeros on the bottom line, the human race is standing there kind of seemingly joining in because you're kind of encouraged to take part in this consumer society and so on. But at the same time, kind of increasingly aware this isn't doing it for me. It's not doing it for anybody. We seem to be approaching a form of chaos.
Well, the lockdown revealed that, didn't it? Revealed to so many people that they hate their life and they hate their job.
Yes.
So, and a lot of people renegotiated what they want to do moving forward.
Yes.
So I don't think they anticipated that part of it, because we are just in a rat race, and it's this idea that from the age of 5 to 65, you 5 days on, 2 days off, 5 days on, 2 days off, pay off mortgage, buy as much plastic stuff as you possibly can, and then you die. And it also revealed that people were terrified of death because they haven't lived. Life isn't supposed to be just about gathering as much stuff as you possibly can and then you die. And it's never enough now. And it's almost unachievable for the generation below us to own anything. So there's a danger there that if they're not going to own anything, they're just going to completely renegotiate what life is and sidestep it. I think that I can see your point that humanity is at the point of falling off a cliff because we've just been fed consumption. But I do think that it'll eventually come around. Maybe not even in our generation, maybe the next generation, because I know that my children aren't materialistic at all. They've no interest in it.
Yes.
I lived with a guy years ago, so his dad was high up in Ciummei, and he was explaining that the technology that they had, so they wait for it to rise up, get as many sales, plateau a bit, and then they release the new one, okay? And they were years in advance in technology. But that doesn't work now with the internet, because it would have been, this is what's in fashion, but because everything's so fast, that also has allowed people to go, well, there's no catching, there is no fashion, there is no this, that. So then I'm going to have to look at, well, what am I interested in? What do I want? And my daughter, she went to university to do, just school came easy to her. She can just read it and learn it. Whereas I colour it in and I have various forms of mnemonics to learn something. But she went to university and to do computer software engineering and just had no interest in it. But she has an interest in learning. So she's currently doing sign language because she was interested in it. When she was younger, she did Morse code. She would learn something over the summer. And I think that's also where it needs to be renegotiated, because we have all of these children going into schools and universities. For what? For what jobs? School hasn't caught up with the fact that these jobs aren't going to exist. So that gives us an opportunity then to be completely different. Or we can go down the Chinese model where you don't have any freedom of thought or freedom of expression, and they don't create anything new. They're dependent on stealing intellectual property from other countries because they're so suppressed their people that individual thought has been eradicated.
That thinking, I mean, it's in some ways it's hopeful in the sense that it suggests that there could be some kind of soft landing in this context. But isn't it far more likely that there'll be a crash landing in this? I don't just mean in the economic terms, but in the human terms. That, we're so conditioned by these materialist ideas that we measure ourselves. Money is the measure of everything in our societies. If you go back to 1943 and Eamon de Valera did his dream speech, which was so-called after the fact, but it was really about the Irish language. But there was this section of it in which he described the ideal Ireland, that Ireland which we dreamed of, which was like, cosy homesteads and, happy maidens and, athletic youths and sturdy children rollicking in the grass and so on. Beautiful image, But that image was then appropriated. Very interesting the way this was taken up. It was appropriated in Irish culture, and nobody knows who the architects of this appropriation were, but when you look at it, it's quite fiendish, because it became known as the comely maidens dancing at the crossroads speech, which is like a caricature of what he was saying, right? But in fact, he never used the word comely. He didn't mention crossroads, and he didn't mention dancing. So that leaves just the maidens, and he actually said happy maidens. What he was actually saying was essentially what you're saying, that what we're saying here is that there's a mode of living in which you can attain the basic essentials of life, and a little more maybe, which make you comfortable, happy to rear your family, out of which so much joy can come, we've lost all this. There's a scientific principle, the Easterlin principle, which actually has established this as a scientific fact, that up to a certain point, as I say, you can grow your happiness by becoming better off financially. But once you reach that ceiling, it's very hard to become incrementally more happy just by using money. You have to throw millions at it in order to achieve a little bit of progress. This is well known, it's well established. But I remember actually back, you would have thought that, for example, the crash of 2008 would have brought some sense to people. But I remember in 2009 trying that idea out when I was speaking in public and throwing out De Valera and his speech and all that, and suggesting that maybe it was time to have another look at this. People were absolutely apoplectic at the idea, just as they would have been in the middle of the Celtic Tiger. They hadn't learned anything objectively in the context of the meaning of what was happening, to make them actually think, maybe we need to look at this at a fundamental level.
But that's the danger of money, isn't it? It's the love of money that's the root of all evil. And that's attaching their ego. So I'm more important than you because my car's worth this and your car's only worth that. So that's leading with your head.
Yes.
And I think that we need to go back, and that's the Irish spirit of leading with your heart. And there is only a certain level of happiness that can be achieved. Listen, it's when you look at beautiful things aesthetically, it's pleasing to the eye. So when you have a beautiful home, a beautiful car, it's aesthetically pleasing. But it's also aesthetically pleasing to walk through Trinity College at night. It's beautiful. So there's so much beauty in this world, but we're ignoring it because we're attaching our ego to it. So they don't want to hear that because that's an attack on their ego. That's, no, I need to earn it back. But now they've got to the end of it. And what was at the end of it? So can we not then be wealthy beyond money? So then what is wealth? Well, it's your health, your mindset, your loved ones. Can we not consider that what wealth is? So what is the point of being a millionaire and having nobody around you and having bad health? Would you trade it all for your health? Absolutely. But nobody focuses on their health. We seen that during people were listening to me because they cared more. When I came out with my first video, the reason that it was so popular is that people didn't care about their health, they did care about their money. And that's disappointing reality, but that's how it worked.
And isn't the problem there that, as we've been discussing, the level of what you might call intellectual leadership in our societies is rock bottom? Well,
there's no leadership of us. It's top-down authority. Much as you can say that the scariest thing, the most worrying thing is digital ID and CBDCs, I don't think so. I think what we should be more worried about is that the people that we are supposed to have put in power don't listen to us and have absolutely no fear of consequence, repercussions for their bad behaviour from us. I think that's what we should really be worried about. And that's what we need to fix first.
We've come to the end of part one. Be back with Melissa on Patreon in a short while. We're going to talk, I hope, about the spiritual side of this, the fact that we have been in a spiritual war, the emotional response as human beings to what's happened, the absolute gobsmacking absurdity and unbelievability of it, and yet the fact that it's happening. So I hope to see you there in a short while.